Think about the archetype of the rogue. Usually, we get the brooding cynic or the honor among thieves romantic, but Fire Emblem, Radiant Dawn gives us Heather, a character who completely upends our structural expectations by weaponizing socio-cultural performance. Look, Heather isn't just picking pockets for the thrill of the larceny. Heather is executing a calculated, deeply protective socio-economic survival strategy, masking structural vulnerability under a veneer of hyper-confident, unapologetic queer bravado. And if you think Heather is just a one-dimensional trope, you're missing the entire psychological architecture that makes Heather one of the most fascinatingly subversive figures in the entire franchise. Let's be real, Heather really knows how to steal a scene and your wallet, all while keeping Heather's hair perfectly immaculate. When we dissect the core psychology of Heather, we run into a beautiful, hyper-rational cognitive dissonance between Heather's external, highly flirtatious persona and the crushing, internalized domestic pressure of caregiving. Because remember, Heather isn't hoarding gold to buy fancy jewelry. Heather is desperately trying to finance expensive, life-saving medicine for a chronically ill mother back home, which fundamentally recontextualizes Heather's instrumentalized criminality, making every single act of theft a hyper-focused, utilitarian mission of preservation. To cope with this existential dread of losing Heather's only family, Heather develops an armor of extreme, almost performative confidence, treating the entire world as a grand stage for grifting. This brings us to Heather's notorious aversion to the male demographic, which isn't just a simple quirk, but rather, a highly adaptive behavioral driver, because in a feudal society like Crimea, Heather recognizes that masculine ego is the ultimate exploitable resource node. Look at how Heather bamboozles Gatry, turning a knight's chivalric delusions into a literal cash cow. Heather's misandry isn't necessarily some dark trauma response, and even the creators of Fire Emblem, Radiant Dawn explicitly stated that Heather was just born with a sapphire-tinted orientation. The way Heather weaponizes that lack of attraction into a sharp, transactional tool is pure tactical genius, essentially cutting through the most common denominator, one coin pouch at a time. Now, if we read between the lines of the narrative, the undisclosed past of Heather reveals a fascinating socio-economic trajectory, because Crimea is a kingdom ravaged by the devastating fallout of the Mad King's War, meaning institutional support for the peasantry is completely non-existent, so we can logically speculate that Heather grew up in a systemic vacuum, watching local authorities ignore the vulnerable, which forced Heather to achieve self-actualization through illicit agility. Learning to navigate the shadowy underbelly of municipal markets not out of malice, but out of absolute necessity, transforming Heather into a localized, pragmatic micro-resistance against aristocratic hoarding. Heather represents the gritty, immediate reality of civilian survival, anchoring the high fantasy stakes through a deeply human, localized struggle, which gives Heather massive thematic weight as a living critique of systemic wealth inequality, making Heather a fascinating, non-conforming catalyst who proves that subversion can be a profound act of love. Even the visual and auditory lore of Heather tells this exact story, like, look at the deep royal blue cape Heather wears, which serves as a performative, almost mocking nod to Crimean nobility, while underneath, Heather utilizes a utilitarian, form-fitting purple garment secured by rugged leather straps that emphasize somatic efficiency and tactical agility, and that specific purple hue is highly symbolic, sitting precisely on the spectrum between royal blue and commoner crimson, visually embodying the liminal, borderline space Heather occupies between the elite Heather temporarily assists and the impoverished class Heather fights to protect, while the voice acting of Heather, dripping with casual cadence and melodic derision, uses auditory playfulness as a psychological shield to deflect from the visceral terror of state execution. This fluid manipulation of identity becomes incredibly obvious when we look at the interpersonal friction in the relationship dynamics of Heather, because whenever Heather is around Nephany, the cunning rogue mask completely slips, replacing the cynical grifter with an idealistic, deeply protective courtship style where Heather projects a romanticized vision of rural innocence, a pure state of being that Heather can never regain. Whereas when Heather interacts with traditional authority figures like Brom, Heather instantly shifts back to a playful, highly calculated manipulation, leveraging instincts to secure a safe position within the army. Ultimately, the creative blueprint for Heather draws beautifully from the classical theatrical archetype of the Picaro, the traditional folklore trickster, mixed with a brilliant, modern subversion of the classic femme fatale trope, except the alluring gaze of Heather is directed entirely away from the traditional masculine protagonist, aligning instead with historical, countercultural concepts of independent matriarchal networks, showing us that Heather is a masterclass in nuanced character writing, proving that sometimes, the most profound heroes aren't the ones wearing shining armor, but the ones quietly picking the locks of the powerful.